Hi, welcome. I'm going to be talking about lesson plan design today, and particularly about Madeline Hunter's design elements and the steps that she thinks are correct and proper to construct a lesson plan. A couple things we have to keep in mind is that Hunter's design comes from behaviorism. It comes from an approach of direct teaching. And if you equate that to our TPI quiz, it equates to transmission. And as you can see on the screen, there are 9 elements. The ninth element is actually not Madeline Hunter's. It belongs to a fellow named Dr. Fred Jones. And what he did is he said that Madeline, you got a good thing going on here, but you know what? If you want to make sure that students understand, they should be able to teach to one another. So peer-to-peer teaching is what they're talking about in number 9, and that really falls under number 6, the check for understanding. So if a student can teach it to another student, then you know they understand it. So these are the 9 steps. So anticipatory set. And you can read these, so I'm not going to read them all to you. But the anticipatory set, one of the things about anticipatory set is, another name for it is the hook. And when we talk about the hook, what we're talking about is the ability to grab the student's attention and start your lesson. And so you can see that the second step is purpose, and that falls under what's the objective of your lesson. And we're going to talk about objectives versus outcomes in a second. Number 3 is the input, and that's primarily the vocabulary, the terminology, the things that students would need to know to understand your lesson. So if you were doing a chemistry lesson, they would need to know, different terminology, different chemical names, those types of things. Modeling simply is what you see there, is that you're showing the students how to do it, the specific skill that you want them to do, or the concept that you want them to do. Guided practice is where they follow along with you. You're still guiding and showing, but they're following along. And checking for understanding, although it's listed as number 6, what it really is checking for understanding happens throughout the entire lesson, primarily through questioning. But there are different methods at the beginning of lessons, quizzes, little things like that, or at the end, closure, where you get students to summarize what they've learned or tell you what they've learned. Those are all checking for understanding. Independent practice is once you are confident enough that students know what they're doing and that things are going to be safe, let's say for instance, then you move on from guided practice down to independent practice, where you let students work on their own. So for instance, in the shop, let's say you've demoed how to do a certain type of cut on a saw. Now students are going to go to the shop and they are going to do that exact cut, or that type of weld, let's say, or an injection for nursing. And then once your lesson's wrapped up, and you're ready to move on, or your class is over, you have to have closure. And during closure, what you're asking is for students to summarize the lesson, what they've learned, and also just to close the lesson and let students know that the lesson's come to an end. And there are lots of different ways to include closure in your lesson. And it's one of the things that we typically, as teachers, don't leave a lot of time to do at the end. And I'm a bit of a hypocrite when I say that you really, really need to do closure. But it's a thing that sort of gets sacrificed when we're running out of time, is that closure piece at the end, because you've already covered all the important things that you wanted to do, and you don't have time to close that lesson off properly. So that's important in your timing of your lessons. And then you can see that there's step number 9 here, which is teaching, which is actually peer teaching. It's student-to-student teaching. One student showing another how to do a concept, how to do that cut, that weld, that injection. And then them showing another student how to do it and do it properly shows that they've mastered that content. And again, the best way to know if someone can do something is if they can model it and show it to somebody else. All right, so when we talk again about objectives or the purpose of our lesson, I'm just going to click on this tab, and this comes directly from the CTL website, and you can see in orange it says objectives are what the instructor will do or teach for that specific lesson. Okay, and outcomes are what the students will be able to do at the end of the course. So in your course outline, you may have 5, 6, 7, up to 10, maybe even more outcomes or things that students will be able to do by the end of your course. An objective may be what you want them to be able to do by the end of the lesson. And that may, again, maybe just a nice smooth weld, a proper injection, a proper cut on a saw, many different things like that. And I'll leave the rest of what it says here in this little piece for you to read on your own. And then, so the very first lesson plan example I'm going to give you is one that I used for many, many years. And it's simply, it's based on Madeline Hunter's direct method. And it simply shows that you would put a topic in here, and we could call it welds. Obviously, you could throw the date in here, the subject, whatever ILM or whatever subject you're working on. And then in this box, I've purposely put intentions, objectives, outcomes. Now, you probably could take outcomes out and intentions out at this level. The other two are more for the K-12 system. So what would be your objectives for this lesson? And what I would like you to do when you're working in this box and you're typing in it is I would like you to put in that students will be able to, and then I would like you to list by the end of this lesson, students will be able to do what? What will they be able to do? And that will be the objectives of your lesson. The assessment piece here is how will you assess during the lesson, at the end of the lesson, that students are understanding what it is that you're trying to convey in your objectives. Okay? So in this area, when you are typing up your assessment, I'd like you to specifically list what types of assessments their students are going to be able to do at the end of the lesson to show you that they've accomplished these objectives over here. Now, in this lesson plan format, I'm just going to scroll a little bit here. I've got a time column, and what I like to do here is I like to list by about approximately how many minutes something would take. So in here, if this was going to be my anticipatory set, I would say that here it's going to be about 5 minutes. And that's because in my anticipatory set, you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to show a video of a weld. And I'm going to add a YouTube link in there so that it shows them how to do this proper weld. So you're going to explain it in class, and then you're going to be able to click right in here, and after you've inserted the link, and be able to take the students right to that weld. Right here is a notes section, and that's just notes for you to remind, use the YouTube video on welds. Or it might be something where you might say collect last day's work. It's just a note to yourself of things that you want to do or say or try to accomplish during that lesson. I will provide all of these forms for you, and they're just done in Google Docs. So if you needed more room in your notes section, you could create more room just by dragging over this line and giving yourself more room. I purposely make it a little bit more narrow so I have more room in here in my teaching points area to add the different things that I want to do. And again, if we go back to our elements, I've done my anticipatory set. I've given my objectives, in this section of my lesson. And then the input are things that you might want to put in your notes section, or you might want to specifically list in here. You might want to put in vocabulary in there, and or terms that they may need to know. That, you know, if we were doing injections, they may need to know the term syringe, needle. They may need to know terms like that, or if it's a specific injection point, where that point is. So these are things that they need to know to be able to conduct the lesson. And without those terms or those concepts that you want to get across to them, they wouldn't be able to conduct this lesson. Okay? And so, again, I would go through this entire section here and fill it in. And I like to type. Some people don't mind writing in there. And I would just keep going. So I would put in modeling, and let's say I'll just copy that. And I've already put in my vocabulary words. I'm going to put in modeling, and I am going to type in there and say show proper proper injection point. Okay, and you might have a picture. Again, you might have a video. You might have anything. And again, how long is that going to take? So down here, I would just put a couple of enters in for myself, and that's about a 3-minute model. And note here, I might put for myself is don't forget syringes, needles, that kind of thing. Might put in this is going to be an upper arm injection, anything like that. Okay. And then we would go back to our elements and guided practice. So what are they going to do now? So let's go back to injections for a second. So under guided practice, if we go back to our lesson plan, if we put in guided practice here, I'm just going to put in a GP for short. Does each student get a syringe and a needle and an orange, and they practice the proper technique, and then as they're doing that guided practice, are you walking around the room looking and checking for understanding? So I might here in this lesson, one of the things that I typically would do sometimes is put just a CFU like that, just to remind me to check for understanding before I move on in my lesson. And that would be just to make sure that students are doing the correct procedure. And again, if we go back to Hunter, now we're doing independent practice. So now they've got the syringe and the needle and the orange thing under control. So for my independent practice, maybe they're using rubber arms. In the good old days, they would use each other, but now it's time for them to practice that maybe on one of the sims or one of the sim arms that the students would have, or again in a welding shop, they would be time for them to practice their own welds or the grinding of the welds, those types of things. And again, you would come in here, and again, because I'm typing, I would put in guided practice. This would be 5 minutes. And independent practice might be 10 minutes. And again, how much time I put in here depends on how much time I have in my lesson. If you have a 50-minute lesson, all of the things in this time column should add up to 50 by the time you're done. So they've got their independent practice, so they're just going to use, I'll say, the sim arm for injections here. And you can see as I'm doing this video cast, it's not perfect. It doesn't. It's not scripted. I'm going sort of just from what I have in my head and what I know. I do have a couple things written down, but you can see that I'm making it up. I've made mistakes. I've had to retype. This video cast that I'm doing does not have to be perfect. Okay, the optimal length would be 15 minutes. This is probably going to be quite a bit longer than that. Right now I'm at 14 minutes and 33 seconds. But that's okay for our purposes today. And then after independent practice, and they've used the sim arms or whatever other way, I'm going to come back to my lesson here. And again, I might have another check for understanding point here. So I'm just going to copy and paste this just to make my life easier, and just put it down here. Check for understanding, and then I'm going to have some closure. So I'm going to give myself in here, I'm going to give myself 10 minutes for closure. And what I'm going to do in closure is I am going to have in here, I'm going to have just a mini quiz. And in that, I'm going to have a bit of a graphic organizer. And a graphic organizer would be just a picture of an upper arm and a needle and a syringe, and they could label the parts that they need to label. And then the other thing that I might also have as a closure is just an exit. I'll call it an exit ticket for today, and that would be simply just a piece of paper that I would give them, and I might write on there, one thing I understood today, one thing I need you to review next day, and one thing I totally didn't understand. So it could be something like that as an exit ticket, and they just hand those to you on the way out. And you can see that my lesson, as I go, my lesson expands for as long as I need it to be. So I also, and this ends up going on to a page 2. But also I have down here references, and so either text references or electronic references. So if I'm referring to page 42 in the textbook, I'd write that down. Or if I'm referring to a YouTube site, I might go www. Whatever the name of the YouTube video is, .com. And I typically don't make these big. I usually take them and make them a really small font, and that way I can add more. Sometimes I'll bullet point them, or sometimes I'll number them. And because sometimes you may not teach this lesson for a whole semester. You may only teach it for fall term and not teach it for another year. So I like to, keep my references in there so that it reminds me of where to go. And because you're not going to remember from semester to semester or from term to term. And then under displays and materials, it's the same idea. I'll go back to the nurses. I'll need syringes. I'll need needles. Maybe we'll need vials with saline solution in it. And again, I would number those things. I would make them smaller so that they don't take so much space. And I would list all the things that I need in here so that when next time I pull out this lesson plan, or next time I call it up on my screen, I can look at it and say, okay, those are all the things that I need. Now, my teaching points in my little square for the next thing actually has gone on to the next page, and that's okay because I can just resize this window, and you can see that on the second part of this is I don't have all the same things as I had at the beginning, like topic and date and subject and outcomes, because on my second page I don't need that. I just need more room to keep typing the things that they need to be able to do by the end of the lesson. So that is using sort of one lesson plan format that I use. This is what page 2 looks like without it being split. It just has, again, time, the teaching points that I want to talk about, and my notes. And I can print this out. I can bring it up on my computer screen. And what I like to do is I like to be able to have this so that I can have all my links and my pictures and my videos and everything linked right into here so that I can have this lesson plan up on the screen. I can be going through it with my students, and as I come to things, like all I have to do is click on them and the picture will show up, the video will show up. Maybe I want to call up another document, maybe I want to call up a PDF, maybe I want to call anything that you want to link to, you can call up. So this is one version of lesson plan. I'm going to stop it here because it's at just about 20 minutes, and then I'm going to talk about the brain lesson plan, which is actually the one that I really use now. But this is one form of lesson planning that you can use. It's pretty plain and simple. But of course, if you have any questions, you can always get a hold of me at Brad McDermott right at rdc.ab.ca. And if you want the link to these templates, I can send those to you, and you can use them for whatever you want. They're all Google Docs, so you can use them as many times as you want. Okay, I'm going to stop the lesson here right now.